And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today's episode is a hot one. I have an interview with the winner of the recent Columbus Champs, but before I get to my conversation with Alex, I want to do some shout-outs. As most of you are probably aware, Set 2 Revelations is going to be releasing next week. However, in the celebration and building the anticipation for this major Argent Saga release, they are doing a sneak peek event. And by they, I mean numerous game stores across America, and I've even got one on my list that's doing a sneak peek event in Greece, which is wild. So what I want to do is run down these stores that are hosting these events, and what I'm hoping is that everybody who listens to this will hear, hey, that's my local store, and go give them some love and participate in this really cool event. So before I get to listing the stores, most of these events are going to be sealed. I will have a link in the show notes to a rundown of all the stores that gave me their contact information, but here and there the entry fee or some other information may be missing. I did include a link to that store's Facebook page, so if you see your local store on my list of sneak peek events and you go, oh, I don't know what the entry fee is, the information to give them a call and get that figured out should be right there. Now, in order to play sealed, you will need to bring a few things to the store. In addition to your entry fee, you will need 10 Argent Shards. You will need 1 Fire, 1 Water, and 1 Light Tower, and you'll need your own Champion and Spirit. I would recommend bringing a few Champions and Spirits because until you open your 5 packs of Revelations, you don't know what the card pool is going to look like that you're building out of. If you are cool enough to have extra shards and towers, maybe bringing a few extra and trying to rope some spectators in at your local store would be a cool thing to do to help build the community. I'm going to run down every store that contacted me with their information that's hosting a sneak peek event. I'm going to give the store, the location, and the date, and any additional information, click on the link in the show notes and you can contact the store directly. So first off, Geek City Games and Comics in North Liberty, Iowa is hosting a sneak peek on November 10th. Tyler's CCGs in Portsmouth, Ohio is hosting an event on the 7th, actually 2, one at 6:30 and again at midnight, which is kind of cool. A midnight sneak peek, I like the flavor of that. Final Round Game Shop in Summerville, South Carolina will have an event on November 9th. Angry Comics in Fayetteville, North Carolina will have an event on November 10th. Brothers Grimm Games in Selden, New York is hosting their sneak peek on November 9th. Alternate Universe, this is the Alternate Universe location in East Norrington, Pennsylvania. Their event will be taking place on November 9th. Highlander Games, home of the largest regional for Argent Saga so far, located in Boonton, man, I don't know how to say that, Boonton, New Jersey, is on November 8th. Gamers Gauntlet in the Clinton Township in Michigan will be having their event on November 9th. Open World Gaming in Greenville, South Carolina is having a Friday sneak peek event. Convergence Gaming in Oswego, New York is having a November 9th sneak peek. Gamers Loot in Indianapolis, Indiana is having a November 9th event. Gongai Games in Beaverton, Oregon is having a November 9th sneak peek. Sassy's Satellite in Schenectady, New York will also be hosting a November 9th event. Swords and Boards in Radcliffe, Kentucky has a November 9th sneak peek scheduled. Lionheart Gaming in Spindale, North Carolina is having their event November 9th. Gen X Gaming in, Agiello, Greece is having their sneak peek event will be on November 8th. And finally, the Game Garrison in Fredericksburg, Virginia will be having a November 10th sneak peek event. So most of these are on Saturday, but there are a few that are going to be on Friday or Sunday. So if you are lucky enough to have a local store that is doing this awesome event, make sure to reach out to them so that you don't miss out thinking it's on Saturday and it turns out it's on Friday. Without any more housekeeping from me, I want to get to my conversation with Alex about his Columbus Champs win, about his deck building, and also the most dramatic story that I've had anybody drop on me in any of the podcasts that I've recorded so far. And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today I am joined by the recent winner of Columbus Champs, Alex. Welcome to the show.
How's it going, man?
So I do want to get to your tournament deck. However, I want to start with just a little bit of background. What is your history in playing games, and what other card games do you play play previous to Argent Saga?
So originally I had started with Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was very young. I never really played competitively much, but that's how I got into card games to begin with. My first card game I played competitively was the Naruto TCG, which was alive from 2006 to 2013. I played it for about 5 years from 2008 to 2013. That died off, and when it did, I started playing Force of Will. I played Force of Will all the way up until about last fall, and then I went to Argent Saga as soon as it released.
Did you have competitive success in these previous games, or was it a little bit more casual?
So in Force Will, I was probably one of the best players in the world for Force Will. I had like the most GP tops, which is the highest level of events. I've been to Worlds 3 times, so I was very, very successful in that game. In the Naruto game, I was a lot younger, so I had some success towards the end of it, but I would say I was nowhere near the upper echelon of players. But I had a few high-level event tops in that game, so I was somewhat competitive.
Given the level of success you were seeing in Force of Will, was there something that happened in that game that caused you to be looking for a new card game to chase, or was it that Argent Saga was just that appealing?
Actually, I got banned from Force of Will.
Oh, jeez. Okay. See, my ignorance here, I've never played Force of Will. This is a card game that totally went under my radar, so I know nothing. What happened there, or are you comfortable talking about that? If this is raw, I don't want to...
I don't mind talking about it. I was planning to quit after Worlds anyways. I really didn't like the company, the direction they were taking. Basically what had happened with one of my friends who they'd banned in the past for a very bad reason, so I was very angry with the company. My friend had taken some product from them at Worlds and had run it up the stairs to me. I didn't know he was going to take it at the moment he did take it. Not that I was like against it by any means, because I just didn't like the company. So he had taken product, ran it up to me. I put it in the room. And then Sunday, when we realized they were catching on, we tried to basically leave the country. They called the police on us.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. They called the police on us and told us if we just returned the product, that they would basically let us go. They wouldn't press any charges, and basically told us to never talk about the incident ever again. And so we obviously returned the product, and this was in Japan too, so we basically just returned the product and went on our separate ways, which was fine with me because I didn't really like the company and I had no intentions to play after that Worlds, so that it worked out basically how I had planned. I shouldn't say it worked out how I planned. Basically, I wasn't intending to play anyway, so it didn't matter to me that they had banned me.
That might be the most dramatic story I've had anybody tell me about card games on this podcast, or any of my podcasts.
There's a little bit more to it. I mean, like I said, I wasn't exactly upset. Like I had planned on Sunday to take some product to myself, just as one last FU to the company. As like I said, I did not really like them, and they had screwed over a close friend of mine and my brother in the finals of Worlds. So I was already on very, very poor terms with them.
So when Argent Saga came along, you were looking for a new game to transition to, or were you kind of thinking about a break from card games, given how negative the end of the Force of Will experience was?
I worked with ARG on the card game, actually. When it was in its beta development, I actually was employed by them. And I had worked on the game very early in its early stages of development. I worked for ARG until about January of last year. That's actually why I couldn't play for the first few events. So I helped work on set 1, and because I did, I was not allowed to play for any of the beginning of set 1. When the expansions came around, I wasn't allowed to play for expansion 1. However, I didn't know any of expansion 1. I wasn't around when that was in development. Much of set 1 also was changed by the time it had gone into production from when I had left. And then when expansion 2 came around, they gave me the green light to play because the meta had changed significantly, as well as the cards so much from when I had actually worked at ARG, that they had given me the okay to play. And to be fair, I scrubbed my first event, so...
Was the concern that you would have some kind of unfair advantage because you had some sort of insider knowledge of card combos or synergies, something to that effect? Or were they just worried that it might look like you were being given some sort of favoritism treatment if you were allowed to participate so close to your employment?
So I think part of it was insider knowledge, although I would argue against that. I really had no knowledge because the first set had been changed so much. I really didn't have any inside knowledge of what the best decks were. We also didn't get to the phase of testing dual colors when I worked at ARG, so I never actually got to play with any dual color decks.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a significantly different game.
Yeah, I think the bigger concern was more just how it might look that someone who had worked with the company was able to play, so it might look bad on them. I think now nobody seems to care because, like I said, I haven't worked at ARG in almost a year now. Most of the set was still in development when I worked there, and a lot of stuff had been changed entirely. I think there's kind of a misconception, too, about designers and playing games, because just because you design a game doesn't necessarily mean you're the best. And in fact, a lot of times it's the opposite. If you've ever seen like a lot of companies do like play the designers and stuff, Yu-Gi-Oh does it. I don't know if Magic does it. I know like Dragon Ball Super does it. And a lot of times those people aren't really that great at the game. Or at least they're not as good as the top upper level competitive players. And so I think a lot of times people misunderstand, or there's a misconception because you designed a game, you should be the best at it.
Did you work on actual gross card design, or kind of the refinement at the end where they were trying to balance things? I know you said a lot of the cards were changed later. I guess more generally, what were your responsibilities within the development of the game?
Mostly I just gave feedback on cards that I thought were too powerful. I didn't design too many cards myself. I had submitted a few cards for design and they were changed a little bit. Soulfire Dragon was one. Winds the Cloud Sea was one. There are a few others. Fail Golem number 2. So there are a few cards I had submitted and Jeff had altered slightly. But for the most part, it was just feedback on cards that I felt were too powerful, feedback on interactions. My original position there was community manager, so just kind of managing a lot of their Facebook, social media, etc. Design-wise, yeah, it was mostly just feedback, interactions I thought were too powerful, cards I thought were too strong and had to be changed. And then even more was changed after I left.
Well, I guess I'm glad you were able to sever ties with ARG in a way that did not involve calling the local authorities.
No, I'm on pretty good terms with ARG when I left. I don't want you to think that the little incident with Force of Will is a representative of my character as a whole.
Well, and knowing nothing about Force of Will other than kind of the rumors that swirl around the game store and such, the company that's behind them does not have a good reputation. I don't know anything about the game other than that people really hate the company that makes it.
Yeah, they're pretty awful. I don't want to get too much in depth in it. Their former CEO was a good guy, and I liked him. But they recently ousted him, actually, and kind of took over the company. And as a whole, I am not a fan, to say the least.
It's disappointing when things that we enjoy end up going down questionable paths. But all right, so let's shift gears into Columbus. Going into this event, what did your tournament preparation look like? What decks were in your gauntlet to initially start testing?
It's not so much what was in my gauntlet. Like, I knew the decks that were out there. I didn't do much testing at all. So I saw Jonathan Ball's deck play at the Virginia Top Cut. He actually beat one of my teammates, Ryan Valentino, in top 8. And I was like, hey, that deck looks pretty good. I think that's the deck I'm going to play. I like the way it functions. So I had been working with him for the last week. We talked about changes we'd make to his deck, things we wanted to fix. He helped me out too. He tested with me a little bit, walked me through how to play the deck and whatnot. He also repeated his success at this event with that deck, which was Gillian Sola. I ended up traveling with Colin Kaiser. He's a Florida local. He lives in Tampa, so he's about 4 hours from me. We were both flying out of Orlando, so I went to his house the night before. He owns a game store in Tampa, Sunshine Games. So we had been testing at his game store the night before. I was playing Gillian Sola, and he was just running the train on me with Helena Kite, which is not what I had expected. And I think at that point I was like, well, I can probably beat a lot of inexperienced players, but if I go up against someone who knows what they're doing, it might be a problem. And then we played more at the airport the morning of the event after we had landed in Columbus and we're just waiting for the venue to open up. We were playing and he kept beating me with Helena Kite. I think he 5-0'd me by the total score. And I was just like, you know what? I clearly can't play this deck because I'm just getting beat by Helena Kite every time. So he said, hey, why don't you try it with Corona? So play Gillian Corona and have Voidfire Desolation as your win condition. So I said, all right, you know what, I'll try that out. And so I ended up winning, I think, 3 or 4 games versus Helena Kite. And I was like, you know what, this is pretty good. I like this deck. I didn't get to do much more testing that day until there was a giant card event. I played in the giant card event. My only loss in the giant card event was to Ben Lodi's. He was playing Liam Fizzy. He won because he was up towers and it was best of 130 minutes. I asked him, though, to continue play as if we were playing like an actual match in 50 minutes. And I actually went on to win. He broke all my towers, but I was able to actually stabilize, come back, and win the game. So I was like, well, that's pretty good. If I can go undefeated in the, well, technically not undefeated, but if I can beat all these decks in the giant card, maybe this deck's good enough. So I kind of molded over that night, and I said, you know what, I'll just play it. I haven't played much else, and I don't really want to play Helena Kite Mirrors. So I ended up playing it. I was 4-0 at one point, and at that point I was like, okay, yeah, this deck is really, really good. So I'm glad I made the decision I did, and then, of course, I ended up going on to win the event.
Did you predict that Helena Kite was going to be the dominant Champ Spirit combination for the meta?
Yeah, I assume so, because it was the most popular deck at the last event, and then it ended up winning, and usually when a deck ends up winning, its popularity either tends to usually stay the same or increase. So I was fairly certain that Helena Kite was going to be the most popular deck, and as long as I could beat that, I would be fine. I think I ended up, in Swiss, I played 5 Helena Kite decks, and in Top Cut, I played 3. So I think it was a pretty fair assumption.
Did you build your deck to specifically target that matchup? Largely, this type of win condition with the Voidfire is not super concerned with what the opposing player is doing. It seems like you can win out in kind of a vacuum, but were there decisions that you made with your list that were specific to target that matchup that you expected to see most frequently?
So the list was kind of already set. Like, I didn't change much from John Ball's, like the blue aspect of it. I didn't change too much from what John Ball's Gillian solo list was. I put in, like, I think Keiko's was the only thing I really changed that much, to some of the creatures, but the spells were all the same. As for the idea of the Voidfire was, or the red and the Voidfire, was that it was meant more to target Helena Kite. That was the matchup that I needed to be able to beat the most, was Helena Kite. It just also happened to work very well against the other control decks, because you actually have a way to deal direct damage. In a way, yes, it was kind of to target Helena Kite. It was set up that way to see if we could beat that deck every single time, but I'd be lying if I said there was a lot of preparation and forethought put into it, because it was kind of just something that Colin came up with last minute.
Do you say Gillian or Jillian?
I say both. Gillian, Jillian.
Yeah, I
usually so. Gillian. Usually Gillian, but sometimes Jillian kind of rolls off the tongue easier, so I just say whatever comes to mind.
If in the moment I feel like correcting whatever somebody said, I'll switch to the other one just so I can be a smarty pants at Friday night games. So did Corona bring anything to the deck other than 8 red cards? Did his Soul Burst ever become relevant in any of your matchups?
Absolutely. Not as frequently as I would have liked, but so the 2 biggest ones were, besides using it for just Corona Ruby, because that's probably the most common thing I used it for, 2 uses I got out of it most frequently were, sometimes I needed to play Keiko and I needed to pick something up, and they had mana open for their removal, whether that be Dust Strike or some type of removal that Gillian had. So in response to them trying to bounce the Keiko, I could give it the quickness with the Corona Ruby and tap immediately and stack something. Typically it was Mayu, so like if I was playing a black deck and they ripped my Mayu out of my hand before I could cast it, and they somehow still had mana open, I could play Keiko and give it quickness and immediately pick up my Mayu without having to worry about him dying before he could actually tap.
Really cool interaction. I didn't even think about quickness for the ability to tap. That's cool.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about it till about round 5 when I played Colin and he did it to me, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm probably gonna do that at some point, and I did end up doing that. The other use was just when I had Voidfire down enough towers, kind of giving guys quickness so I could actually win the game without having to like sit and kind of durdle and wait for creatures to stick for a full cycle. So like I think I won one game where I had like I had a Kins on board and they had 1 tower left, and it was like the Dark Tower or something. So I went play Juggernaut, give it quickness, bust the Dark Tower, then Kinswing in for game. That was pretty also irregular. I think that only happened like 2 games. I actually did it to Colin in game 3 of our finals. He has the red tower left, and I think I gave quickness to my Juggernaut. I may not have. I can't remember for sure, but I do think I remember maybe giving quickness in that game, but I could be wrong. Actually, no, I might have used it earlier. I really can't remember, but I know I used it at least twice throughout the tournament.
I imagine all the games start to blend after 2 days of that many games.
Yeah, there's a point on stream actually where I was playing, I think it was Colin or John Ball, and I like looked at their grave. I'm like, I thought you already played this card? And they're like, no, that was last game. And I'm like, God. Yeah, the games are very long and grindy, and a lot of them feel more or less the same, especially the control mirrors. So it's easy to forget what was and wasn't played, or lines of play that you did or didn't make.
All right, well, let's dig into the deck list itself. I think we'll start with your 8 fire cards. We've kind of touched on Voidfire Desolation being your win condition. Do you have anything you want to say about that card in specific?
Yeah, that card's broken. That card's so good. I mean, Voidfire Desolation was obviously the MVP of the deck. The thing that the light version didn't have that I disliked was a really solid way to win the game once you had stabilized. Like you had Omega Magic Hikaris and you had Juggernauts, but like if they still had Sylvia, especially if they had ways to keep picking Sylvia up, you didn't have a way for your Juggernauts to actually ever break through. And I think that's something nice that Voidfire Desolation brought to the table, was you had a way to deal direct damage without caring about any of their creatures. And since there's obviously no counter spells or counterplay, you could kind of just cast it without ever really having to worry about them having a response or some type of counterplay. You obviously can't cast it to a full board, but ideally you're just casting it onto a board of 1 or 2 creatures. You kill one of them, you break a tower, you destroy a shard. Sometimes you don't even need to break a tower. Sometimes you can just destroy a shard and kind of just cut them so low on shards that they can't even play the game anymore.
The remainder of your red package, Omega Magic, Kasai, and Molten Explosion, these are fairly standard removals. Do you feel like Kasai is legitimately a good card, or just that it's like the 3rd best red spell?
No, it was awful. It was absolutely terrible. I was a little shook because I played so much Liam the night before in the Giant card, and they were getting real close to winning, and Kasai's pretty okay versus Liam. So I ended up putting in a 3rd one as opposed to Colin, who played a 3rd Voidfire. If I could go back, I would absolutely play a 3rd Voidfire over the 3rd Kasai. The card was useless and probably got casted a total of 5 times throughout the day.
That does not speak well for Omega Magic Kasai.
Yeah, it's 15 is not a good number. Like if it did 2K and then like 15 was the extra, then it probably would have been fine. But 2K is just, or 15 is just not a good enough number. And it was happening. I could only do it when they attacked as opposed to like any time. So it was pretty awful.
Feels like Red has some of the weakest cards in the first couple sets and the weakest Omega Magic, and it's just brutal.
Yeah, it was pretty awful. Volcanic Eruption or Explosion or whatever it was, that card was really nice. I actually like that card a lot. That card was very, very, very good for me all day.
Have you ever just forgotten that Molten Explosion has Instacast because it doesn't have the little circle symbol up next to the cost?
Oh no, I don't even look at that. Like I just know if it's instant or not. Like the only time I ever look at that is the first time I see a card to know if it's instant or not, and then like I'll just retain whether or not it's instant. So
I've definitely screwed myself up a couple. Oh, I can't play. Oh, wait, yeah, I can. So digging into the blue package, this is very similar to John Ball's list, which I devoted an episode of the show to discussing. I noticed that you do have some more units than he was playing. It looks like just the 2 Kako. How did he perform for you throughout the day?
Oh, Keiko was great. So a lot of times, like if you have your like nut draws, like you open Mayu and Voidfire, you see them both before like turn 7 or turn 8. What happens sometimes though is the Golem of Vengeance gets to come in on 6 or whatever before you can cast Mayu, because you never want to tap out into Mayu unless you have like Keiko, or you know for a fact that your opponent can't destroy it. So a lot of times she sits in your hand till turn 7 or 8 till you can actually bounce her back to your hand or your deck or whatever. So what would happen sometimes is my opponent would run out Vengeance on 6 or 7 or whatever and get Mayu before I could actually play her. And so when they do play Vengeance, they typically tap out, or they don't have enough mana to leave leave open for a removal spell. So what happens is on the follow-up, you run out Keiko, and you know you're getting that Mayu back guaranteed. The other nice thing about Keiko, too, was in the grindier games where I could deck out, Keiko helped prevent me from decking out. He also let me lock my opponent out in some instances where if I was playing a Hoenn Kite deck, a lot of times they'd have a lot of bad cards in their grave. They'd have like Failed Golem #1s or Devourments or whatever, and I could stack their deck with it too. So like when I knew they had a hand of 3 or 4 cards that just weren't doing anything for them, I could kind of stall them for a few turns by just giving them really bad draws with it. So the card was really, really solid all day long. I think 2 is the perfect number, and I would definitely keep it at that.
So out of your lower cost spell kit, the Reactive Runes, the Mizu, ASB, Tidal Rush, were there any of these low cost kind of removal, or I guess it's not really removal if you're putting it on top of the deck, but these low cost sort of stall spells, which of these do you feel like was the best performing over the course of the day? Or are they each MVPs in different situations? I guess talk about your early game spells. Let me phrase it that way.
They more or less do the same thing. What was the best spell? Volcanic Explosion was kind of the best. And the reason I say that, Volcanic Explosion, Reactive Runes was good too. And the reason I say Volcanic Explosion is because, so an issue with Hoenn Kite is a lot of their creatures net immediate value when they come in. Things like Golem of Avarice discarding a card, that's like a threat that I want to get rid of. Or Silver Watchwoman gets to Swift again, so bouncing her like isn't the best. Like you can do it for tempo, which is fine, but like she's gonna come in again. Molten Explosion is one of the only cards in my deck that actually killed these cards, as opposed to just bouncing them and having to deal with them on another turn. So actually, that was one of the best spells for me. The next one was maybe Ancient Serpent's Breath, and that's because it was really easy to protect my Mr. Kins with them, and it let me top deck stuff. Reactive Runes was up there too. Mizu really underperformed. I mean, I would keep it in there just because there's no other spells to play, but a lot of times I didn't let them break 3 towers, so I never got that bonus. I never got to get the 2 effects with it, and all it really did was bounce stuff that attacked. So it was just like, okay, that was probably the one. If I had to like cut one card down, it might be Mizu. I would consider Mizu.
So you said something interesting there, that often your opponents weren't allowed to break the 3 towers to get the bonus effect on Mizu. Kind of jumping to the other side of your deck list here, I see you were running the Tower of Surging Torrents. Did that perform well for you if in the course of your games you often weren't having your towers broken? Was that just a dead tower when it got popped, or how did that work out for you?
So it was dead sometimes. Sometimes it was just like, usually they get to crack 1 or 2 towers, and sometimes I even let them crack those because I'm trying to have them hit one of the specific towers and gain some small advantage in the short term. If it did nothing, it was fine. The regular blue tower, the issue I have with that is you have 7 cards in hand almost at all times. So drawing 2 is just going to make you overdraw. It's going to make you deck faster, and you're going to end up just discarding spells that you might need in your deck later. So it's kind of worthless. Having the blue tower, even though sometimes it didn't do anything, was nice because it did let me search whatever spell I found was most valuable at the time. And even if it did make me overdraw, that was fine because I got the best possible card in my deck from it. So I would just discard whatever the worst card in my hand was at the time. Whereas the blue tower is getting me 2 random cards, and they might not necessarily be cards I needed at the time. And like I said, when it did do nothing, it was usually fine because I probably already had 7 cards in hand anyways, and didn't need the search so much.
So is it fair to say that it was more a choice against the Tower of Water than for the Tower of Surging Torrents, in a way?
Yeah, it was just better. It was just strictly better than the Tower of Water, in my opinion, which just always made you overdraw and didn't get you necessarily the cards you needed. So yeah, it was more about being against than for the Tower of Surging Water. I still think it was really good, just if there probably could have been a better Tower of Water that I may have considered playing if one existed. Like, if I had to rate the Tower of Surging Waters, it's probably like a 6 or a 7. I wouldn't say it was broken by any means, but it wasn't bad.
Well, Mayu. Do you think Mayu's broken?
Oh, yes, that was like the best card in the deck. Yeah, Mayu is absolutely the stone cold nuts. That's like what the whole deck revolves around. Basically, the combo is just on turn 7, turn 8, or turn 9, whenever you have the mana to make sure that she's going to get bounced back in the same turn you play her. You run her out, you void fire them, and then you pick her back up, and you just keep repeating that every single turn. And because you have so many bounce spells, it's very, very easy to keep her from dying and then just replaying her every single turn.
The higher cost control spell package, I see Celestial Magic Chronostasis, Shards of Winter, Return to Slumber. How did these higher cost removal spells perform for you?
They performed pretty well. Return to Slumber is a one-of, so I mean, it only came up sometimes, but Return to Slumber was great because a lot of times they'd have a water tower broken, or I would, or we both would, and I got to top deck guys, so kind of just draw lock them where I was putting guys on top of their deck, so I could put like a bunch of guys that weren't great draws on top of their deck, or I could know what they're drawing for the next 2 or 3 turns. So that card was all right. It also let me another way to recur my Mayu. Chronostasis absolutely overperformed. There's no real board wipes in the deck, and there's no way to deal with something like Juggernaut. So having a way to actually deal with wide boards or to deal with Juggernaut was just incredible. That's where kind of the white version overperforms the blue-red version, is that the white version has a 4-cost Wrath. So when you're in, like, say, time, or your opponent's really trying to rush you down and go wide, you do have a board wipe on 4, whereas with the red version, you don't have a board wipe till 6. Not that that was ever really an issue game 1. I do side into the white package, so I do side back into the Gillian Sola, because I think it stalls a little bit better due to that 4-cost board wipe.
Now, do you want Sola? Because I'm looking at your list here and it says Buckeye.
I did Buckeye because I thought the extra white cards would help me. Buckeye generates a blocker, which Sola does too, but Buckeye puts one out right at the beginning of the game. It can let me prevent damage. The nice thing too was I didn't have to Soul Burst, and this is the main reason. I didn't have to Soul Burst to make the blocker, and that's big because usually I was using my Spirit just for the Corona Ruby, so it made me a blocker without having to ever without ever having to Soul Burst my leader, so I could go on later and Soul Burst it for the Corona Ruby, and I thought that was pretty big. It also gave me 2 extra late cards. There are a lot of cards that I acknowledged in my deck were pretty useless game 2 beyond just the red package, like Statue at the Argent Tower was never going to do anything. I didn't really need 3 Juggernaut because I wasn't ever really going to use them, or even like Keiko sometimes I didn't need. So I wanted to get more cards out of my deck for cards that I just thought would be more useful beyond the red package. So being able to put 2 extra cards that I thought helped me stall the game out better was a lot more useful. Like I said, the game plan game 2 was just you win game 1, and then you just play a deck that you don't feel can lose. And I do want to be very specific. When I say stall, I do not mean slow play, guys. I mean just basically you play your turns fast, but you just keep playing removal spells every turn so your opponent can't actually ever win the game. I even made sure to ask all of my opponents, do you feel I played the game in a timely manner game 2? Because that was always my strategy. Game 2 was just you side in the late package and you never let them win the game. Every single one of my opponents that I played in a timely manner. In fact, most of the time I was making sure my turn was just draw pass, so I didn't have any issues at the end of the tournament or someone was like, hey, he slow played me. But yeah, it did work very well for me overall.
So it looks like the sideboard is kind of like a turtle up plan. Just don't let any damage through, kill the whole board as much as you need to. Was there ever any risk that was not going to be sufficient armor in a game 2? Did you ever feel like, maybe I needed another Hikari in here instead of this extra removal? Or did that balance work well for you?
It worked very well for me. I would only side into it, I think, if there were 30 minutes or less on the clock, because like I said, I'm not trying to slow play, and the deck can only go on I can only stall for so long before like, oh, I'm out of removal, like they might be able to like break through and kill me now. So if it was anything more than 30 minutes, which I don't think ever happened, if I had more than 30 minutes on the clock, I'd actually just stick in with the original package and just try to win the game again. Like I wouldn't go for the turtle up plan, as you put it.
So the 1 Argent Shard in your side deck, clearly that replaces the Zephyr Crystal in matchups where you know there are no augments that need targeted by the Zephyr Crystal. Was there ever a moment where the Zephyr Crystal came out on turn 1 or 2 or early enough in the game that it coming out exhausted really felt bad? Did you ever feel like you were punished for that inclusion?
No, not really. It never it never really punished me that much. There were some times when it was like annoying. It was like annoying at worst. Like I'd be like, oh, I want to play Mr. Kin's turn 1, or oh, I want to play Phantasmal Darts. Oh, god dang it! Like of course I hit the Zephyr Crystal turn 1. There was actually one time, probably the most annoying time I think, was I was playing Ryan Valentino's girlfriend in the giant card, Brittany, and obviously we know each other and stuff, and we're on like the same team essentially. So we're playing. She goes first. And of course, I'm pretty sure I hit Zephyr Crystal on 1 versus her. And I was just like, oh my god. And she was playing Liam. So that was actually one time it really did hurt me. Outside of that, though, no, it was just annoying at worst. I sided out every game too, no matter what the matchup is, because I don't want to brick on my potential turn 4 Wrath. I didn't want to brick on any turn really, because my plan is stall, and if I brick on like a necessary spell 1 turn, that can just throw the whole plan out the window. Just all it takes is 1 turn of me not being able to do what I want to do, and that could potentially cost me the game. So even if they did have augments game 2, I still just sided out the Zephyr Crystal. I didn't really care if they were drawing more with the labs game 2, because it typically didn't help them win the game any faster. They could draw as many cards as they wanted, and it wasn't going to make much of a difference to my stall plan. But the biggest reason was I just didn't want to have to play Wrath on 4 and then hit that Zephyr Crystal on 4 and lose the game because of it.
Do you feel like Zephyr Crystal, much stronger than the other crystals in the game, do you feel like that the issue is Zephyr Crystal is too strong, or that there is not enough augment removal currently present in the format?
I think it's just Zephyr Crystal too strong, with Air being the go-to because of Sylvia. Zephyr Crystal just presents a card that it doesn't cost you a card spot in your deck. It doesn't cost you a card spot from your hand. It's just completely free. On top of that, it's instant speed, which there are no other instant speed augment removals that exist currently. So there's really no reason not to play it. In this event, even a ton of decks that didn't have Kite main were still maining a 1-of Zephyr Crystal just because of how powerful it is. And I think that's really a testament to the card's power level. I really do think that even unless they made some form of augment removal that was incredibly efficient as well as being instant speed, I see Zephyr Crystal being around for a while. I would say it's probably one of the most meta-defining cards because of how easily it is to remove augments. Decks that could exist, that could revolve around augments, just can't exist because of it.
I see the deck name blank on your deck list was left empty. You don't name your decks, man?
Did have a name for my deck, and then I couldn't remember it, so I just named it something like basic. It was like Into the Void or something.
No, it's just blank. It's just, there's nothing there, dude.
I know, I forgot. I had a good deck name, and I actually forgot it. I can't remember what it was. I am usually try to be very creative with my deck list. That's one thing I used to do all the time in Force of Will, was I got very creative. You can read the rest of my deck list, and you'll see I tried to get real creative with it. Usually I have a good name picked out, or what I would like to think is a good name.
That's fair. I am probably guilty of taking naming decks a little more seriously than it deserves, to be honest. I just find that to be really fun. So were there any notable matchups throughout the course of the tournament, or card interactions that really stuck out to you that we want to make sure to get on the show before we start to transition away from the deck?
The best card in the deck, hands down, besides Mayu, which is a 1-of, was Mr. Kin's. He was just the star of the show every single time. And I was so happy. If you open 3 of him, you keep all 3. No questions asked. He was absolutely 100% the best card in the deck.
Okay. What do you predict is going to change once Set 2 releases? Will this deck type still be viable, or is the meta just no longer hospitable for this kind of slow, grindy control?
I feel like the meta might not be as hospitable for this kind of slow, grindy control. I don't really know for sure. I would have to test it. I haven't really done any Set 2 testing yet, so we'll have to wait and see.
Do you have any cards that have been spoiled for Set 2 that you feel confident will make an impact and see a lot of play?
Well, 002 for starters. I talked about it a little bit on, we went on NH Raven. He asked us what our favorite card in the set was, and mine is the Sandsea Drake. I really like that card, and I think there's going to be a way to abuse it, if not now, in the future. For those who don't know, the Sandsea Drake is a 4-drop air card that says, when it comes in play, if a card was sent from if your card was sent from your field to the discard, you can return a guy to the hand. But the important effect is, it says whenever a guy is returned to your hand this turn, you can give another creature quickness. And I think there will be some type of Gears-esque, not necessarily including Gears, but like a Haste-esque combo deck that will revolve around that card at some point.
If you had to make a decision as far as what direction Argent Saga heads, are you more inclined to try to keep the hardcore tournament players happy or the casual crowd?
I think it's a balance. So obviously casuals buy a lot more product than your heavy tournament players. But at the same time, you need some type of high-level competition, especially given what ARG's brand has kind of been built on. They've always been hosting these high-level competitive tournaments. And I think a lot of the players who follow ARG are, in fact, high-level competitive tournament players. So I think there's a nice balance. Obviously, because casuals buy the majority of the product, you need to lean probably a little bit more towards them, simply because that's how you're going to make your money and keep the game stabilized.
What's your current favorite card?
Oh, my current favorite card. It's Skytree Command Center. That card's busted. That card's just absolutely like, if Zephyr, that's like when I was saying, oh, certain decks would exist if Zephyr Crystal didn't exist. That's one of them. That card is just the stone cold nuts, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like that card a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Are there effects not currently in the game that you would like to see introduced? Something from another game, something that, whatever you could make up. Is there some effect that we don't have currently that you'd like to see a card bring to the game at some point?
Nothing in particular, no. I mean, I'm kind of good with whatever they throw at us, as long as it's not like too broken. I don't have any mechanics, I think, that I specifically want to see by any means. I think there are maybe some mechanics I might be like, oh, that's cool, or oh, I'm glad they took that, but like I'm not like, I can't think of one in particular that I'm like, yes, I absolutely want to see this in this game.
Okay, well, before we get to shoutouts, is there anything else that I missed throughout the course of this about the Columbus event or deck testing that you want to make sure we hit before we kind of wrap things up here?
No, that's about it.
All right. Well, is there anything or anyone that you want to shout out, plug, or promote here at the end of the show?
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out, number one, to our True Duelist boys. They definitely helped me test, maybe not so much this deck, but they definitely helped me test and obviously give suggestions, and they're my team. Colin, who actually recently just joined our team as of yesterday. So I'd like to give a big shout out to him for coming up with the deck idea, helping me test it, and basically just kind of helping me test all the way up to the event too, and letting me crash at his place and drive me to the airport and whatnot. Finally, I'd like to give a big shout out to John Ball for inspiring me to even look at Gillian Sola to begin with, because we probably never would have stumbled upon this deck in the first place if it wasn't for him giving me the idea to play Gillian Sola and also helping me test it.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. I appreciate you taking the time and walking through this deck list with us, and I wish you success at your future Argent Saga tournaments.
Thank you very much.
All right, man. Have a good one.
You too.